This story is slightly different as it's more strange than creepy. It happened back in 2004 when I was 12 years old. It was autumn, the beginning of the school year, but the weather was still uncharacteristically warm, and the dark nights of Northern Europe had not kicked in yet. I was playing outside with my best friend, Kirsten. We were sitting and talking on a large rock in front of my apartment complex, right under my window. I don't remember how long we'd been there until we see a man we had not seen before walk towards us. I say man, but he had that baby face going on where he could have been anywhere from 18 to 35. At first, we didn't pay him any attention, but as he reached us, he came and sat right next to me, put his arm around me and said, "Sarah, finally, where have you been? I have been looking all over for you." At this point, Kirsten laughs, thinking it's a boyfriend of mine that I didn't tell her about. Except it isn't. I have never seen this man in my life. Yes, we lived in a small town, but it wasn't small enough for you to know everybody there, and I was definitely not popular enough for strangers to know my name. Now, a lot of weird things happened often in my hometown, from gunfights to explosions. Kirsten and I made friends with a criminal convicted of chopping two people to pieces, and we had been chased with an axe by the weird alcoholic guy who lived in the forest, so we knew that some people can be extremely dangerous, and if your instinct tells you that something is wrong, you better listen to it. Except, in this case, my instincts never kicked in. I did not see this man as a threat, at all. Thinking to myself that perhaps it is someone I met over the summer and made friends with, trying really hard to remember his name, I just turn to him and say, "Hey, how has your summer been?" praying that he'll say something that'll jog my memory in regards to him. His face lights up and he just starts talking about random things. When I can't remember him, no matter how hard I try, I just say, "Sorry, but we really have to go now. It's getting late and tomorrow's a school day." I say this while mentally preparing myself that he might not like it. But he just smiles and says, "Oh, all right, I'll see you around then." I basically drag Kirsten by the arm into my place, and all the while she's still laughing and asking me why I never introduced her to my boyfriend. I shush her and tell her, enunciating every word, that I have never seen this man in my entire life. Kirsten looks at me for a bit, then goes silent and just says, "Huh, that's really weird, I haven't seen him either." Next day, our geography class took place outside. We had to use a compass or something. I no longer remember the details of the class. Not even 10 minutes into the lesson, one of the boys in my class walks up to me and tells me there's a man asking for me. For a second, I'm confused. The events of yesterday already forgotten. But as soon as I turn around, I see the man from yesterday standing among my classmates, looking at me, and everything that happened the day before comes flooding back to me. Now all my classmates are good-naturedly making fun of me, asking me to introduce my new hot boyfriend to them. Even the teacher says jokingly that I will have to tell my boyfriend to wait until the classes are over. At this point, I'm really tired, so I just walk up to him and tell him that I'm in class right now, and he really shouldn't be on school grounds if he's not a student. He immediately tells me that he's got a car nearby and that he can drive me home. I just tell him that I'm planning on walking home as the weather is nice, but he's welcome to walk with my friends and I. And sure enough, after my classes end, he's right there waiting for me. Normally, I walk home with a group of 4 friends, so with an addition of this weird man, we can't all walk next to each other. He walks ahead of us, occasionally looking back and asking about my school day, about my grades, etc. Completely harmless questions, no weird compliments, no weird anything except for the fact that I still don't know who this man is. Same evening, my phone rings. A call from an unknown number. I answer and I hear a familiar voice go, "Hey, did you get home all right?" I ask if one of my friends gave him my number, and this time he sounds almost hurt when he says, "No, you gave it to me. How can you not remember?" Again, we talk for a little bit, mostly about my grades in school. I am not going to drag the story out too much, but this man called me every single day, followed me to school, in school. He sometimes came into the building and found me in the school corridor just to sit and talk to me, and walked home with us after school. He found me when I was out with my friends. He always knew when my extracurriculars would end. He was always there, everywhere, every single day. Until one day in November, I left my house to go to school. Looking around and I couldn't see him. The whole day passed and he was nowhere to be found. As weird as it sounds, I was concerned, thinking whether something had happened to him. I never did find out. As I said, it's been over 16 years now and I never saw that man again. And everyone I spoke to about it vowed they did not know him either. P.S. I did tell my family. They told me not to encourage him and that I should ignore him. I grew up in a small town in Alabama. A little bit after I graduated high school when I was 18, I started dating this guy in his early 20s from a nearby city. He was a very handsome, tall, muscular male that we'll call Sean for this story. He told me on our first date that he used to be a part of a very well-known gang in the United States. Sean explained that he'd only been a part of this gang in his younger years because he had grown up in a bad area and hadn't really had any other options. He also did have proof of being in said gang, including being aware of gang signs associated with said gang and having tattoos associated with that gang. Which I did Google to see if the tattoos and gang signs were, in fact, associated with said gang, since I know there are some people who like to lie about being ex-gang members and the like, for some reason to seem cool. Sean didn't seem like the type to lie about that also. I gave Sean the benefit of the doubt because he didn't really give me any bad vibes. I remember he was always a gentleman to me and treated me very well. So of course, I didn't really suspect anything about him. We dated for a few weeks before the night that I found out the truth about him. I was staying over at Sean's apartment one night and everything was seeming pretty normal. This was the first time I'd ever stayed the night at his apartment since I do tend to be a bit cautious. So regardless of his background, it wouldn't have mattered. I just don't really like staying over at people's homes until I get to know them a bit more. And I do have an at least 3-date rule. I'd been too busy before that to really stay over at his place. So that night when I was staying over, Sean's best friend was visiting for a bit, and that's when the red flags started to show up. It did seem weird to have a friend over when the girl you are seeing is staying over for the first time, and it was revealed to me in private that Sean's friend was another ex-gang member from a well-known gang that is the enemy to the gang Sean had been a part of. Of course, I can accept people all have their backstories, but it was definitely just a weird thing to suddenly tell me out of the blue. Additionally, Sean had not even told me his friend would be at the apartment that day in the first place. An additional note, Sean's friend did corroborate that he and Sean were both ex-gang members. Then after Sean's friend had left, we were hanging out in his room. And this guy had a literal arsenal in his room. I'm not exaggerating when I say he had enough weaponry to arm a small militia. This included things like grenades, bulletproof vests, and an AK-47, or a gun similar to it, to name a few of the weapons he had in his room. Needless to say, that was the second red flag of the day. That night we were in bed together and I can't remember what led into him revealing to me what he said in our conversation. He confessed to me that he was in fact still a part of the gang he had told me he had said he was out of now. So of course, I was immediately giving him this look like, "I'm sorry, what?" Then he proceeded to go on and tell me that he actually was a hitman for the gang, and while he hadn't been active as a hitman as of late, he would still accept hits if they were given to him. The entire time he said this, he just looked me dead in the eyes with the most deadpan casual look, no feeling in his eyes, and spoke like he was talking about the weather. It was extremely creepy, and I knew right then that this guy was a straight-up sociopath. I don't doubt that he was lying. I've met people who try to get clout by lying about things like this, and he was definitely not one of those types. I did stay the rest of the night and then left the next morning and never talked to him again. I was definitely not going to keep on dating someone like that. There's not really anything to the story after that. He never really tried to contact me after that. I'm sure some people will probably wonder why I didn't just leave right after he told me he was a hitman. I didn't think it was a good idea to react strongly and immediately storm out of the apartment. I also didn't actually feel like he was a danger to me personally. But he definitely had the vibe of someone who had killed people. The reason why I recognize that kind of vibe is another story. He was always very polite to me, but regardless, there was no way I was going to keep dating him no matter how hot he was. To summarize, I dated a guy who said he was an ex-gangster that lied to me about this and was in fact a current gangster and hitman for said gang. In 2016, I was 26. I worked a seasonal job in a warehouse about a 30-minute drive from my flat. One day after work, I ordered Thai takeout from a place maybe 10 blocks from home. There was a gas station next door, so I filled up and left my car at the pump to say hi to some friends who lived across the street while I waited for my food to be ready. Maybe 15 minutes of chatting, then walking back across the street grabbing my food, heading across the lot to the gas station into my car and a 2-minute drive to my flat. At the time, I lived in a duplex flat, with a gutted adjacent flat attached. Behind me was an old vacant motel that was currently being gutted and repurposed into studio apartments. The nearest building to the left was an old clamper bar leading to the main street and the highway, and to the right was an empty lot where a building that was demolished nearly a decade earlier once stood. The rest of the neighborhood was lower income. I pulled into my drive and noticed a car driving relatively slow past me. I went inside and leashed my dog up to let her out. As I was standing in the yard waiting for the dog to do her business, a maroon Subaru Forester, newer at the time, drove by slowly multiple times before pulling into my drive. I assumed he was lost or looking for something and walked up to him as he got out of the car and approached me. He looked like any older white man in his 50s. I remember he kind of reminded me of my dad. I asked him if he needed anything, and he replied, "No, I just was checking on you." I asked him if I knew him, figuring maybe I didn't recognize him. He replied, "I saw you up by the gas station. You seemed like you needed help. I'm just seeing if you need anything." I'm usually pretty slow to the cut, but at this point I'd pieced together that this man had followed me from the gas station to a friend's house, to a restaurant, and then home. It immediately didn't sit right. He was just standing there, he wasn't leaving. And I had time to process the situation. I thought, maybe he's an older guy, I'm a younger girl, and he's on this side of town in a nice car for whatever reason. Maybe he thinks I'm a trick. And I said again, "I'm sorry, I'm not picking up what you're putting down. Why are you here?" "Nothing. I'm just a nice guy checking to see if you're alright." I specifically remember him calling himself a nice guy. During the period of this conversation, I had made it to my stoop, and he had closed the gap. Behind me was the door, then me, the dog, then him and his car. I told him you should leave, to which he asked, "Do you wish you had a nicer place?" And if my dog, a medium-sized German Shepherd, was friendly and reached out toward her for a pet. I yanked her behind me and said no, and pretty aggressively told him, "Dude, leave." He finally started backing away. I stood in the drive until he got in his car and drove off. I took down his license plate and car description. Then I went inside. Less than 15 minutes later, he pulled back into my drive, sat there for a second, and drove off. That's when I decided to file a police report. It didn't sit right. I just figured it was nothing, but I lived alone, and if anything happened, I'd want a record. It was 6 or 7 p.m. at this point, so the non-emergency line was closed. I filled out a report online and never heard back from the police. Never saw that man or his maroon Forester again either. He might have just been a weird old man. I never saw any reports of anyone going missing from Nevada in 2016 either. I know it's a stretch and probably has nothing to do with anything, but I only just thought of this again in the last few months. They caught that guy in New York, and I wondered if he was in Nevada before it ever came out. Same age, same build. But how do you remember a face from 7 years ago? I just remember the man at my place having more salt and pepper hair. He treated me like he thought I was soliciting, and he wanted to, quote, help. He did not respect my boundaries. It was probably nothing and not the same man. Scary, off situation just have a way of sticking with you. Maybe trying to connect this is my way of making it make sense. I'm a single male, 33, who lives alone in Denver. My apartment complex is not what you would call a nice building. I'm on a road close to Colfax Avenue, which, if you're familiar with the geography of this area, is not the safest boulevard in town. I'm a few streets away from it, but close enough that I wouldn't consider this an up-and-coming neighborhood. This evening, I was watching Netflix on my couch. My 2 cats were cuddled up against me as I lay under a comforter. The night before, I had watched a horror movie that was scary enough to leave me in an unsettled mood, making it hard to sleep. So this night, I decided to watch a stand-up special instead. Keep it light so I wouldn't have any trouble getting some shut-eye. I have classes early the next morning, so I was surprised when I made the conscious decision to turn on a second stand-up special and let myself fall asleep on the couch. I was just so comfy where I was and didn't want to move, not even to turn off the several lights on throughout my apartment. I remember dozing off around 11 o'clock. It was effortless, which meant I was really snug under the covers with my cats flanking me on either end, creating a tucked-in feeling. I fell into a dream wherein I was on an impromptu date with this guy, whom I didn't recognize, at a Blockbuster video store. He bought me a blue and yellow underwear, like a Blockbuster would sell in Dreamland, insinuating I would take the hint of his intentions. He was also desperate for a job, so when we got to the counter, he was given an off-the-cuff interview that didn't go well. And all of a sudden, I'm not sleeping anymore. I'm woken up by a knock at my door. Then a man's voice says maintenance. I just sat there sitting bolt upright on my couch. I knew something was off. I looked at my phone, which was by my left hand, and the time was 2:15 a.m. I didn't move. The floors in my apartment are old wood and there are many creaky floorboards. I didn't want whoever was knocking to know someone was at home and awake, let alone alert to his presence. My cats got up and ran over to the door as they normally would, but I stayed still and listened. After a few minutes with no answer, the man walked away from the door and down the hallway to the stairs. A moment after that, I heard the back door to the building swing open and closed. I have one window where I have a partial view of that door, so I break my paralysis and race over to it. I saw an old-looking green SUV sitting in the no parking zone just in front of the back door. It must have been running the entire time because I didn't hear it start up and the brake lights were glowing red. Someone, presumably the maintenance man, got in the car and it drove off. I don't know what his intentions were, but no one knocks on someone's door at 2:15 a.m. claiming to work for the landlord with good deeds in mind. Had it been a true emergency, wouldn't he have knocked again? Used his service key to get into the unit? What did I just avoid here? I can only assume it was an attempted robbery at best or abduction at worst. When I was watching the SUV drive off, I surveyed the other apartment windows. They were all dark. I can see every unit except the 2 other corner apartments below me from that vantage point. I think because my apartment sticks out from the building and has many windows, I was targeted because my lights were visibly on and noticeable from the street. However, I don't know how this individual got into the building in the first place, as you would need a key to do so. I've never been so legitimately afraid as a single person living alone. I'm grateful I installed a security chain on my door when I moved in. I'm also so glad that even in my disoriented state, I had the presence of mind not to move from the couch or make any noise. As I recount the event, I can't stop my eyes from leaking tears, though I wouldn't call it crying. My nerves are definitely shot. I don't think I'll be going back to dreamland anytime soon. I have turned off all the lights save for the lamp by my bed. I usually can't sleep with it on. Tonight, I don't think I could sleep with it off.